Hello YouTube! Today I'm going to show you how I handle validations in my Next.js API routes. If you have never used them, feel free to click on that card in order to learn how to use them. Now, let's say that we received the following JSON in one of our API endpoints, and we want to validate that the name is between 2 characters and 10 characters. If you are not using any validation library, this is the code you will end up creating. And that's nothing wrong with that code in specific. The problem is when we start to validate a lot of properties, we start to have a lot of endpoints, and more than them, we start to have more than one developer in the application. Usually this type of approach is harder to extend than if we use a validation library. You have a few examples. For example, you can use Express Validator, you can use Joy, which is one of my favorite libraries, but unfortunately Joy doesn't work very well on the front end. But fortunately enough, we have a library called UP that works very well both on the backend and on the front end. So when we use UP, and if you ever watched any of my formik videos, you saw that I use UP quite a lot, you can then share all the front-end validation that we have with the backend and vice versa. So we accomplish one of the goals when we decide to use Node.js, which is to share as much code as we can. And UP makes that very, very easy. So if you have never used UP in your life, let's say that we want to now validate the following JSON that we had in the beginning of this video. And the first thing we need to do is we will create an object, and this object is just imported from the UP library. And I already imported the string, the array, and the number, and you will see in a few seconds why. The second thing we need to do is to put all the properties over there that we already had in our JSON. And so we have the name, the age, the email, and the other two, right? Now, let's start to validate the name. And the name is a string, and we want that string to also be required, which means in every request we receive in this API endpoint, we want the name to be there and also to not be an empty string. So we will put a required field. And then we can say, as we said before, that we want it between 2 characters and 10 characters. So with just that line of code, we are telling UP how to validate our name property. And this is called a schema, as we can see over there. Now, in order to validate the age, as you can see, I already have imported the number from UP, so you probably already can see what's going to happen. I will have a number, I will say that that number is required, and the minimum age is 18. The new thing that's there is that integer, and the integer is just saying to UP that or the person has, for example, 18 years old or 19 years old. The person can't have 18 and a half years old, for example, okay? Now, if you ever did validation for emails and websites, you know how hard those usually are and how complicated are those validations in terms of the regular expression. So if you are using UP, it's usually very easy. We just need to say .email and .url. And as you can see, I'm saying that these 2 specific JSON properties will be optional. So if the users or whoever is calling our API doesn't send the email and the personal website, we will not fail validation, okay? Then we have the nationalities. And if you remember, the nationalities was an array that was composed by objects. And so let's just create the array first. So we will just say, okay, our nationalities will be an array. We say it's required, and we have at least one nationality. Everybody needs to have at least one nationality. As far as I know, I might be wrong here, but I think everybody needs to have at least one nationality, right? So let's do that validation. And then inside the array, we have objects. So we will do something very, very similar to what we already did. The first property that we had inside the array was the country, and the second one was the observation. Now, this is very, very similar to what we did already. We will just do the country is a string, the observation is also a string, one of them is required, the other one is optional, and now we have the validations that we need, right? As you can see, you can go as deep and as nested as you want. You can have an object inside an object inside an object, and you just need to map the JSON that we have into the validation schemas. That's what we usually call those, schemas or validation schemas, all right? In the case of country, for example, let's say that you want the country to only be Portugal, which is my country, or the country where I live at the moment, the United Kingdom. So you can use helpers like the following. You can say one of Portugal or the United Kingdom. You can also have the opposite validation, not one of, okay? So creating these schemas becomes much easier, at least in my opinion, to read and then to expand. You can look into these validation schemas, and it's usually much easier to understand what's going on than if we have an if-else logic over there. Now, for my friends that are using TypeScript and might be thinking, Bruno, but I need to create that validation schema, and at the same time I also need to create an interface or a type. No, you don't need Yup as an helper for that. So we can just do the following. We can say, if you are a type person, you just say type person, which is a person type, equals to type of the schema, right? If you are an interface person, you can also use an interface and do the following. So independently if you are a type person or an interface person, you can just declare those, and then in TypeScript you will have or the person type or the person interface. Of course, we will not call them person type or person interface. We call them just person. I call those different names just to distinguish between them over there. Okay? Now, the thing that you might be asking is, okay, Bruno, but how can I use that schema to validate? And that's the line that we have now on the screen. We can do the schema.validate, and imagining that we are inside an API route, we will just pass the request.body, which is where that JSON is, right? And just pay attention, we need to put an await over there because this is returning a promise. And it will also return the validated object, right? So if it's valid, most of the times the person and the request.body will be exactly the same, okay? Now, if for some reason the validation failed, we will just add a try catch, and the errors that Yup returns to us, they are very, very good. You will see in a few minutes when we start to do the code that they are very, very good, the errors. So usually I just do the following. I just do response.status. I put a 400 in this case because we couldn't validate the data, and I send the errors that formik creates because they are usually very, very good. And I said formik should be Yup, not formik, sorry. And then the next thing that you can do is use that person to anything you like. You can just use the person to save it into the database. Just pay attention that line number 3 and line number 4 should be in its own try catch, because if they fail, I don't want to return a 400 to my users. I want to return a 500, but otherwise it will just become too big. And saying that it will become too big, you might also be asking, Bruno, yes, I agree with you. This is becoming too big. Do I have to put that try catch with the validation in every single endpoint I do? That's very hard to do, and I need to type a lot. Well, don't worry. You can have your normal handler like you have over here, and as you can see, we don't have any validation code over there at this stage, right? There is no validation over there, and we will just create a new middleware. And at line 14, you can see that now we have a validate middleware, which we will create in a minute or two. And the first property we pass, or the first argument we pass to that validate function, is the schema, and the second one will be the handler itself. All right, so basically with this, you will have everything you need without any repetition in your code, and you will have validation out of the box that you can then share that schema to your formik or React hook form and use it on the front end as well, which makes sure that we don't have any incompatibility or any differences between what you show on the front end validations and on the back end validations, right? So with that all said, let's now jump into Visual Studio Code in order to start to code what we discussed right now. Over here we have a default Next.js API route. As you can see, the only change I did was to change the name of the file to be person.ts. Now, the first thing we want to do is to create our empty middleware. For now, the middleware will not do anything, and then we will start to add logic into it. At the end of the video, I will pick up this middleware and move it to its own file. So how can we do a middleware in Next.js? We will need to have a function. As we did in the presentation, we will call it validate, and it will receive the handler, which is of type Next API handler. Now, inside, we will just return an async function that has the first parameter as request and the second one as a response. So I can copy this signature over here and just reuse it. And now we just need to do await of the handler, request, and response. And this is probably the simplest middleware you can have in Next.js that in reality does absolutely nothing. Let me just come over here and do const handler equals to dev. And now I will just do the following: export default verify or validate, sorry, not verify, validate our handler, right? And so this handler is this function, and the validate is our middleware that we will move to another file in a minute or two. Now, what we can do inside that validate, we can start to come over here into this validate and check, is this a post or a put? We do validation. Otherwise, if it's a get or any other method, we just move forward without any validation. So let's do the following. If post or a put includes request.method. So if we are in a post or a put, we will do the validations, otherwise we will move forward. Now, how to do validations? Well, we will do exactly what we did into the presentation. We just need now to start to receive a schema. And luckily, I copied the schema over here from the presentation. So we can come over here, just copy this person schema and pass it into the first parameter of our function. Let me just import that. And now I just need to see the type of that. So I will copy that bit and I will do the following: schema of that type. I will just import that from up, and we can come inside this, so control and click, and we can see that the first parameter of our generics is the object shape. So I can copy that, put it over here, import that one, and now we have all the typings from TypeScript completely happy with us. We can come over here and now do the following: await the schema.validate request.body, right? And we will do catch, we will have error, and we will do response.status 400, and we will do JSON with that error. So we will return whatever error up will return to us. Just make sure that when you have this, no code will run after that, because otherwise we will still reach here. So let's just do a return. So we stop the execution over there. We don't want our handler, which is this function, to run even in cases that validation failed. Now that we have a little bit of code, I think it's time to just do the following: come over here and just return the request.body, and we need to do those three dots to spread. And now I will just do the following method, and I will do request.method, right? And now we can come to any API client that you like. At the moment, I'm using Imsonia, but you can use Postman if you prefer, all right? And as you can see, right now, I'm having already a validation error. If we keep going down, you will see that we have the following: age must be a number type, but the final value was not a number. So let's just make this age to be, for example, 33. I will do this, and as you can see, I'm already receiving everything that we expect. The method is a post. If I change it to be, for example, a put, now I receive a put over there. So this thing is working. I don't want a get, I want a post. And now the first thing you might start to look for is, I have an ID over here that I never declared in our person schema. And I also have another property called ASD. Can we just remove those, Bruno? Because I don't want my object to have that. Yes, you can remove that. Let's remove that. Let's come over here into our validate, and we just need to do the following: request.body equals to whatever our validate is returning. And now we have some options over here. The first option that you probably want will be to remove everything that is unknown. So let me just do strip unknown. I will say true. So you will come over here, and now as you can see, we don't have any ID, any ASD, anything specific there. You can also look and say another thing: Bruno, you are sending a string. Why is that working? It shouldn't work. Why is up doing this conversion and showing me 33 as a number? Is there any way for me to tell him, look, I want you to be very strict and only accept numbers. Yes, there is a way. Let's come over here, and instead of using this strip unknown, you can say strict, for example. And if you do that strict, when you do the validation, you will see that age must be a number type, but the final value was a string 33. If I come over here and I change it to be the number 33, now everything works once again. Now, you might have another client or another consumer of your API that is doing something you don't like. For example, imagine that someone is doing personal_website and you don't want them to do this, but they are doing that and they will not change that, so you need to adapt yourself. Well, you really don't like that, right? So let's ask Cube to save us once again. So we will come over here into our schema and we can do the following: .camelCase, okay? Or if you want to do camelCase for every single request, I will remove it from our schema and I will do it into our middleware. So it will be for all the schemas that will exist into our application. Now, if you come over here and you do send, you can see that basically our personal website, and sorry, I did something over here that I don't want to have, which is the strict, right? Because otherwise it will not do that camelCase for us. And if I have that personal website, as you can see now, Yoop is doing the magic for us. He's converting that. You can even receive stuff like this: personal space website, and Yoop will do the conversion for us. You can receive personal, all in capital case, personal_ website, for example, and Yoop will do that for us. So this is a very, very good feature in my opinion, and usually I have always that enabled for my API clients. Okay? Now, another thing that you might want to be aware of is there is another property over here called the abortEarly. And the abortEarly by default is to true. So what does that mean? Let's say that we have the age to be, for example, AAA. And the country, instead of being Portugal or the UK, I will have, for example, Brazil. So when I do this, you will see that I only have one error, which is the age. But you probably want to see all the errors of your API immediately. So you can come over here and do abortEarly to be false. So when you do abortEarly to be false, you will just see that now when you scroll, you have two errors. You have the age and you have the nationality error saying that you should be Portuguese or from the United Kingdom. So that one is also very good. Now, the last one that you might be looking for is, okay, Bruno, but in cases where I receive, for example, the ID from the put, when I receive the ID from the put, I want my middleware to also validate that, but I don't want to create all new API or all new schema. I just want my middleware to handle that. Is there any possibility for my middleware to say, okay, if it is a put, then just receive an ID and validate the ID without me having to do anything specific? Yes, we can do that. Let's come over here, and the only thing we are going to do is the following: schema, which means correct schema, or you can call it any name you want for this. I will just call it new schema, and I will do request.method == to post. Then the schema will be the current schema. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is the following: schema.concat, which is to extend this schema. And the way I'm going to extend, I will just say object, and inside this object I will say ID, which will be a number. And let's just start to import this, otherwise this will be very painful. So let's just do object number from Yoop, okay, Yoop. So that way Yoop has the autocompletes for us. And we just need to now do required dot minimum of, for example, 1. Or if you don't care about saying the minimum 1, you can also say that it needs to be a positive number. Okay? So if I now format this code, you will see that what we are doing is, if we have a post, we will use whatever schema the user, or in this case the developer, provided to us in this middleware. Otherwise, we will just do this schema over here, and I will do the schema that already exists for the post plus an ID which is a number required and a positive number. So let me come over here. Let me just remove these properties that we don't need anymore. I will do send, and now I have an invalid JSON because I have this quote over here at the bottom. And now what's failing? Let me just fix our age to be 33, the nationalities to be, for example, the United Kingdom. Okay, so now everything should be working, and it is working. I have this 1, 2, 3 over here. So let's just see that I sent, for example, -1. It should now fail. Oops, it didn't fail. Why not? Let me just say that I have, for example, I have a put, right? So let's say I have AAA, and I will just try to work with it. And now it is failing. Why is that failing? Because, because I forgot to change this schema over here to use my new schema. So let's just do new schema over there. And now when I come over here and I do send, I should receive an error saying ID must be a number type, but the final value was not a number. I can say, for example, -1. -1 should fail, saying the ID must be a positive number. So if I now say 1, for example, now I have all the validation working once again. Everything should be still working also for the post, right? So if I fail, for example, this 33, and I say it's AA, it should now fail. And so we have all the validations that you might want. As I said in the beginning of the video, let's just copy this into its own file. So I can come over to this folder called middleware, and I will do a new file, which I will call validation, or in this case, validate. I'm always calling this validation for whatever reason. And we just need now to do the painful part of importing all of those ones from the respective modules, right? So I will import this one as well. And I just need to import object and number from Yup. And now you feel free to go to your application and start to use this middleware. Of course, you might need to change something in your specific application, right? And do your own stuff. But this middleware will do almost everything that you might need. Now, if you are also a bit annoyed of doing APIs like this, for example, if you do request.method, request.method, and you are very tired of doing stuff like case, post, and then doing all your post over here, doing all your post over here, and then doing a case for the put, and you want a more express-like approach, for example, doing something like request dot for example, post, and you have the request and the response, and you can immediately do something there, a bit like Express, right? You can check, I never know in which site, but in one of these sites, you will have a video that I created using something called Next Connect that will allow you to have that nicer API rather than doing this switch case or if-else logic, right? As always, if you have any question, any suggestion or anything, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. The links for my repository and everything else like the UP documentation will also be in the description of the video. So I hope you liked the video, and if you do, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye!